Hello, and welcome back to Bowls with the Bard. My name is Cakes, I am your host. This week we are talking to the lovely Erin Drill, but before we bring you that content, we want to give you a disclaimer in iambic pentameter. Here it goes. Sometimes when you get high, things can get blurry, and sometimes cameras get fuzzy as well. We shot this interview while out of town and lacked our better lighting equipment. The interview itself is really great, so please excuse the crappy quality. Now, without further ado, welcome Erin Drill. Okay, the second pitch that Erin has today is I guess his production idea or a concept idea for a production of Measure for Measure.
Yes, Measure for Measure is my favorite Shakespeare play. And I first saw it, I studied abroad my sophomore year. And I went to London and I went to the Globe and I saw closing night of Measure for Measure at the Globe. And it was so cool when you're just there standing, drinking your beer, standing. I was literally people were leaning on the stage, watching. I'm that's so cool. It just felt like what Shakespeare was, or as close as we can get to probably what it was then, and that was really exciting because I would love to go back in time and be that's not really the point though. The point is I saw Measure for Measure, and I left the show just really thinking. Measure for Measure is considered a problem play, but I like that about it. I like the problem plays because I'm then you have a question that you kind of have to ask. You don't get an answer necessarily, but you have you just have to solve the problem, and that's exciting. But a brief description of Measure for Measure. Measure for Measure, the Duke of Vienna is unhappy with the state of Vienna, so he decides to step down and disguise himself as a friar and see what's really going down in the streets. And he appoints Angelo as his deputy, and Angelo is a right-wing Christian fundamentalist, and he's we're gonna go letter by the law, if you have premarital sex, bye-bye. And the first person they catch, there's this guy Claudio, who's engaged to this woman Juliet, and they only aren't married yet because of some technical thing having to do with money probably, but they're basically married. They're committed to each other fully, and he gets her pregnant and she's pregnant, and so they're oh, we're gonna execute you, Claudio, to demonstrate that we mean business. And Claudio's he gets someone to go to Isabella, his sister, who is a novice. She's gonna become a nun, but she has not taken her vows yet, which is interesting, and I think that gets neglected a lot because I think people think of her as I've always been a nun. You know what I mean?
But she's not.
She's not. No, she hasn't made a decision yet, and so that's also really interesting. Yeah. So he goes to her, and she's a novice, and she's whip smart, and probably if she was here in 2017, she'd be a lawyer because she's amazing with reason. And so they're go to Angelo and plead for Claudio's life, and she does, and Angelo is super turned on by it and is if you have sex with me, I will not kill your brother. And so it's this really twisted sexual blackmail that's just so, and I've been thinking about this in sophomore year when I saw it, but right now with all this discourse with Harvey Weinstein, it's just oh my god, powerful men,
they actually do
this. This is just still happening, it's just 100%, and especially if you look at the government and how influenced by religion a lot of our government is, even though we say church and state are separate, we're very much a Christian nation, and just the hypocrisy basically of preaching this like no sex. Yeah,
Your
and
brother
then
has
obviously
sex,
doing something horrible.
Yeah.
And Isabella now has to make this decision, this horrible decision that, you know, completely throws all of her ethics into question. And she has to decide if she's gonna have sex with this guy and give up her virginity, which, like, if she's gonna become a nun, that's like worse than dying. Like, that's burning in hell for all eternity. And like, or like allow her brother to be executed, but now it's her choice. So it's like, if that happens, it's in her hands. So that's a horrible thing. And she goes to him and he like begs her to do it, and she won't do it. And then the Duke has been like floating around, and he plots to get out of it. And this is so uniquely Shakespeare, this part, because this story, again, stories are often taken. The story of this sexual blackmail has been used a lot, but it's usually a tragedy, and what actually happens is that Isabella does have sex with Angelo, and then he kills Claudio anyway. But Shakespeare took this and made it a comedy. It's classified as a comedy, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they, the Duke, the original Duke, dressed as a friar, does all this plot. He finds like Angelo's ex-fiance, who like he wouldn't marry because she lost all her dowry in a shipwreck. Poor woman. No, she just like lost her family and all of her money and just like her fiance and everything. But I love that character, Mariana. I think she's really interesting. But anyway, the classic bed trick, she has sex with Angelo in the dark, and he thinks he's raping Isabella, but he's not. He's low-key getting sexually assaulted. I don't know, that's confusing. But it's like it's a very weird thing that like the bed trick was a very common like theatrical device in Shakespeare and with other plays too. It's cool. It's weird. Kind of fucked up. But anyway, yeah. And then they like do this big thing where they expose it, and it's more complicated. I'm trying to give you the abridged version. There's a lot of stuff that happens. Also, I want to bring up there's awesome subplots. Including like also they have to shut down all of the brothels, and so there's like all these pimps and prostitutes and this woman, Mistress Overdone, who's the brothel owner, and they're like trying to keep their business running while like, you know, the police are coming around, and the police are just like comically stupid. And like there's so much sexual humor and body, and I think it's so cool. And especially after, because when I studied abroad, it was in the Netherlands, and so like being somewhere where like prostitution is legal gave me a different perspective on this plot, because I'm like being in a culture where that is like, you know, it's not necessarily like looked highly of, but it is a career choice. And so I think that it's so funny, but like so interesting. And then in the end, they all do get arrested, and they end up in prison. A lot of it takes place in prison, and there's this like serial killer there, who like they want to execute him, but like he like refuses to be executed because he's like crazy. It's just like there's so much like funny subplot, but like really dark humor that I think is really, really cool. And tonally, I think it's tricky with the other horrible, tragic scenes, which is why it's a problem play. But I think I see how it's in the same world. And I think like the humor comes from a very real place, and so like I think it actually makes a lot of sense. Basically, the central theme, in my opinion, is shame, or at least, well, you could argue it's justice, really. But my angle is looking at it through the lens of shame, because every character is dealing with some sort of shame. I mean, like, the Duke steps down because he's ashamed of how he's running his city or nation or whatever it is. And like Isabella, like, I mean, she's a nun, and like, you know, part of that means like her habit, you know, is about like shame, and that can be shame in a positive way too. But then she has to, if she has sex with him, like, that's like her shame.
That's her ultimate
shame. Claudio's shame of having to ask his sister to do that and being like, I'm so sorry, like, I don't want to be doing this, but like, I'm gonna die, like, please don't let me die. Angelo's disturbing shame of he has these horrible, and Shakespeare, like, it's hard because Angelo is not someone you want to sympathize with at all, and I don't think you should per se, but Shakespeare doesn't judge his characters, so like any villain always has humanity, and like he has these monologues of just like how ashamed he is of what he's doing, but how he can't stop himself. Mm-hmm. And it's really upsetting, but it's like really fascinating. I also think with this angle of shame, which, you know, in our today's world, it has a lot to do with gender dynamics and like, yeah, and just, you know, this whole thing of like what Isabella's having to do. It's like, oh my god, we're seeing that happen so much. Like, look at all these women who are like saying like this is a regular thing on a daily basis. Maybe not that particular thing, but these things actually are happening. And number two, I think there's sort of like a queer undertone to like the nightlife of it. The city is seen as like morally corrupt, and the Duke steps down is because there's all these brothels, and, you know, imagine like neon lights, like, you know, like dirty strip clubs, like that world, like the red light district, essentially, like, and people are like, you know, making money, like it's own economy, really. I feel like the queer angle comes in because it fits in with the theme of like shame, and how, you know, LGBT people like are, because you kind of come from a place of like you have to like come out, I guess, as opposed like
straight people don't have to come out.
Yeah, like it's just like you kind of have, you always will have shame for it, and then having that like urban nightlife with like the aesthetic of like a drag club or something like that, or, you know, just that like you know, contemporary. I imagine this in a very like contemporary way. And then also I was thinking about I'm not positive if I would do this because it does depend on the text, but I would be interested in like making Claudia and have kind of changing the, basically, instead of just the fact that it's like they had premarital sex, it's like because they're a lesbian couple with, you know, who's trying to have a child, and that's why. And I think like we see in today's politics like attempts and successes in a lot of places to like strip back people's rights. Yeah, I think like a lot of it, this show, I think it really resonates because it's about disenfranchised people fighting for social justice. I could go on for a long time because I just like, again, it's just something that like interests me. It excites me. It makes me want to try it.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. Like I don't know, every time I think of that play, I think of it exactly the way that you just said, like with Isabella as the nun and all of that stuff. And
yeah, I mean, Isabella was probably like 19.
Yeah, but like it really does. It makes a lot of sense for today.
Yeah, and I think also one of the reasons that it's tricky to perform is the ending because there's like a huge dramatic court scene and then everything's resolved and basically they're gonna execute Angelo, but Mariana is like, wait, please don't kill him, like you just gave me a husband, like I don't want any better man, I want to marry him. And it's like fucked up because it's like this guy who you consummating your marriage was him thinking that he was raping someone else. So it's just like so and she wants to be with him, and I think like it was a different story of forgiveness when it was originally written, but I don't think that resonates with us as much. So I think it is more so Mariana's pain. I think like we all do things, like people do bad things for themselves because of pain. And I think also I imagine her being, you know, like fairly rich because she's like gonna get married to this politician who's like, you know, on track to be really successful. And then her like brother and father like die in a shipwreck and she loses all his money. And he's like, oh, you don't have a dowry? Like, and so she grew up in a certain lifestyle of being like rich, and now she's not because she doesn't have any money and she's alone. And in like the time period, like you can't really be like a single woman alone. Like you can't even really, like women can't walk out in public without a man at all. Like that's like, and that's why a lot, like for example, like in Twelfth Night, like that's why Viola has to dress as a boy. It's like literally because she can't be a woman alone. Anyway, but yeah, so I think it's something that like Mariana's decision to stay with him, and then she asks Isabella to plead for his life, and Isabella does. And I think that's really interesting because the way she does it is very academic. And it's a legal argument. It's like he didn't rape me, he only thought he was raping me, but technically by the law he didn't do anything wrong and you can't kill him. That's an interesting angle because I think I think the show like does a really good job at like satirizing the legal system. So I think at the end where she kind of makes this argument, which, you know, like, I mean, I think it does also, like, again, if she is a Christian, like, forgiveness is in accordance with her faith. But she does it on a legal standpoint, which is just, like, interesting to me. Because I think a lot of this play, like, comments on society as a whole. And then the Duke, and the Duke's been doing a lot of other stuff to make everything complicated because they're like, oh, even though Angelo thinks he had sex with Isabella, he's still gonna kill Claudio, so we have to find someone else's head so we don't kill Claudio, but then I'm gonna tell Isabella that Claudio's dead so that I can surprise her with him later, and it's it's crazy town. And then at the end he proposes to her, and at first basically he's like, will you marry me? And she doesn't say anything, and he's like, and we'll get back to that, let's finish this play. And then kind of like they resolve whatever else they were resolving, and then he's like, and like, will you marry me? And then the play ends. And so it's like Isabella doesn't have any text, so there's no written, decided way for her to respond, and most likely because it was classified as a comedy.
Generally, the end of comedies ended with marriage or like
and which I think it basically ends with a marriage, which like you would think would be a happy ending, but like historically marriage has never had to do with love, so it's just like if that's the qualifier, it's like it doesn't necessarily mean it's funny or happy. It just means they're married, which is a whole so it's like if these all these people, and you're looking around and you're like, look at all these people, like there's only one healthy relationship on stage right now, there's 4 marriages, because also they make Lucio marry this prostitute. But probably in the time period, my guess is that they did get married, and she, decided not to be a nun because she would have to be celibate, which is interesting because at the beginning she hasn't made her vows, so she's not committed to anything, or at least that's what I imagine it would be. And I've seen it done in multiple ways. I've seen it played as like an awkward joke where she's like, okay. And then I've seen it where they get married, and I've seen it when they actually did a good job at building the chemistry between the Duke and Isabella, which in other scenes there was I hadn't seen it as a believable romance until that production, which was interesting. And she did decide, she takes off her habit and like runs up to him and kisses him, and it's like, it's not necessarily what you want her to do, because I think throughout the whole thing, I think you kind of respect Isabella like for sticking so true to her values no matter what. She's gonna, she even if it means her brother dying, which was like a real possibility at one point, she was like, I have to maintain my relationship with God. And so I don't think it's a satisfying thing, but I think it's a reasonable thing. I think after everything she's been through, it's understandable if she would want to be like, there's no God. There's no God when this stuff's happening. Seriously. No God, I'm sure of it. And I'm sure of it now. I read about a production where they like let Isabella decide in the moment every night, and sometimes she would slap him and sometimes she would kiss him, and I think that marriage and those marriages at the end are one reason why people don't perform it a lot now. But I think that there's a dissatisfying truth to them. And so I don't think you leave Measure for Measure feeling like, it's like a marriage, we're all together. Maybe that was how it was traditionally done, but in my eyes, you don't leave Measure for Measure being like, and everything's satisfied. You leave Measure for Measure being like, wait, what? And then you go home and you think about it and you talk about it, and like that's why I got so interested in it, because that's what it made me do. And so I think that
that's like why we should be producing theater right now.
Yeah, because I think it's really cool when like a play makes you actually be like, that actually like challenged my way of thinking. And Measure for Measure definitely like you kind of have to question your own ethics, because it's like you're just watching Isabella be like, what am I going to do? Am I going to protect myself and my virginity, or am I going to protect my brother and be like, Christianity, it's all about charity, and it's like a complicated ethical question. As an audience sympathizing with her, I would hope you find some empathy in your horrible little dark hearts. But for this poor most dejected woman, I feel like you sit there and you're like, wait, what would I do?
Yeah.
What the fuck would I do? I don't know, because you can't even know until it happens. And so like I think that's why it should be performed today, and my point of view on it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today, Erin.
Thank you. I love you too.
If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to see more content like it, Please like us on Facebook at Bowls with the Bard, subscribe to us on YouTube at Bowls with the Bard, and follow us on Instagram at Stone Shakespeare. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
1,000 sighs to save, oh, lay me where sad true lover never find my grave to weep there.